The caravan getting mixed reactions on Capitol Hill.
Of course, we don't want to see the border closed, but you know what? Safety of our nation comes first.
They're just flat out lying about the national security threat associated with the caravan.
Jeff Paul is live at the border in San Ysidro, California. Jeff.
Yeah, Dana, we're standing here along the border in Tijuana, Mexico, where the situation here has calmed down significantly. But yesterday, a much different story. This is the border wall where a huge group of those migrants ended up rushing to, and in some cases started throwing rocks and large pieces of cement. Now, because of that, Border Patrol agents say they had to use pepper balls and tear gas to get the crowd to break up. Now, some of those folks who were throwing those rocks and trying to get into the United States ended up being detained, while others were just running to safety, trying to get away from all the chaos.
When we went to that side, it was when they started throwing tear gas at us, and there were many children who fainted. Many young children fainted. My daughter also got gassed, pregnant women, and there were many men who also fainted.
Now, as you take a look at this picture, this was tweeted out by the mayor of Tijuana. It shows some arrests both on that side of the border, and there were also some arrests here on the American side. We're told around 69 arrests from people who were trying to enter the United States illegally. But back out here live, the situation here along the border, as we said, the intro has calmed down significantly. As you take a look behind me, you can see some barbed wire and a dirt berm sort of set up along the border. And beyond that, that's where a lot of those Border Patrol agents are staging, getting ready to respond should a demonstration or march get out of hand like we saw yesterday. So far, we aren't hearing any reports of any sort of actions like that happening today here along the border. Dana?
All right, Jeff Paul, thank you for that report from the border. For more on this, let's go to Ty Matsdorf. He was a former Deputy Executive Director of the DCCC. Colin Reed is the Executive Director of America Rising. Good to have you both. Colin, let me go to you first about just the situation that, leading up to the election, President Trump was accused of scaremongering, that the caravan was thousands of miles away, but it has arrived at the border, and now we have the situation that our Border Patrol is trying to deal with.
Yeah, anytime we're talking about the border, Dana, we're playing to President Trump's strengths. It's an issue he campaigned on. It's an issue he's comfortable talking about. And it's an issue where he feels comfortable. And on the other side, the Democrats, they're really divided on this issue. You've got people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who campaigned on a platform of open borders and abolishing ICE. And she and a bunch of other newly elected, newly empowered Democrats are coming to Capitol Hill soon. So they're in no mood to compromise with the Republicans when it comes to border security. But when you see these images playing out across your TV screen, you're inherently not going to side with someone who wants open borders and no security.
Ty, there was a tweet from Tom Perez, the chairman of the DNC, late last night. He said, shooting tear gas at children is not who we are as Americans. Seeking asylum is not a crime. We must be better than this. Are the Democrats, though, in a little bit of a box here? Because surely the Border Patrol does not want to use tear gas on anybody. That's not what they would like to do, especially children. But the children are there, and they are being used as props, to bring them over illegally to try to rush the border.
Look, I think that we need to separate this discussion into three distinct parts. One is the policy of seeking asylum, which is obviously incredibly complex. Second is the morality of America always being a beacon of hope. So put those aside. But just politically speaking, look, I don't think that this is a win for anybody, because I think that what this does is just further puts people into their corners, into their partisan corners. And look, it's hard enough to get things done on Capitol Hill. And when you see these images, when it's blanketing TV waves, it just makes things that much harder to get done, particularly as Colin said. Like, look, President Trump knows where his base is. And the fact that they lost 40 seats in the House shows you that that's probably not where America, where the swing voter is, but he knows where his base is. And that's what he's focusing on. Like I said, this is just going to pull people right into their partisan corners, which, for the millions of people trying to seek entry into the country, that's not the answer, obviously, they want to hear.
Colin, that might be true in the House, but it's not necessarily true in the Senate, where the Republicans were able to stave off or basically flip the seats back to Republican control, especially in the Midwest. So is it actually something that where the president could utilize the politics of this to get the legislative answer that he's looking for?
Well, I agree with Ty. The politics of it, if you're in a red state or a red part of the country, this is something you feel strongly about, as opposed to if you're in a blue part of the country. But I was struck over the weekend none other than Hillary Clinton was talking about the need for strong borders and unchecked immigration in Europe and warning about the perils of that. And she's been forced to walk that back because that's not where her party base is. But it kind of speaks to where everyone's going.
Well, we'll see what happens, as the president says. But I think we all agree that something needs to be done. This is a terrible situation, and our Border Patrol is in a terrible position to try to have to push this back. In the meantime, I want to ask you about the Mississippi Senate race. This is the last federal race of 2018. Everyone, after tomorrow night, no more federal elections until next year. I wanted to read to you from James Hohmann of the Daily 202 over at the Washington Post, talking about this Mississippi Senate election. He said, if tomorrow's special election in Mississippi is a referendum on President Trump, Republicans will win. That's why he will not hold one but two rallies tonight for appointed GOP Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. And Ty, while Cindy Hyde-Smith, you would think in Mississippi probably wouldn't even need usually to have a rally from President Trump. Her campaign hit some speed bumps, which we can talk about. But the Democrats down there are saying that everything is going to have to go Mike Espy's way tomorrow if he has a narrow chance of winning.
Absolutely. Like, for a Democrat to win in Mississippi, let's just be honest, like, you have to pull a straight flush on the river card, and that is never an easy thing to do. I mean, look, President Trump is still incredibly popular in Mississippi. He won the state by 16, almost 17 points. And look, let's just be honest, it's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, and so it's going to be very unpredictable who comes out. And that's why I think the Trump rally, they want to make sure to sort of inject that adrenaline into the Republican Party.
Colin, your thoughts here that the president has to go down and do not just one, but two rallies tomorrow night, for tomorrow.
I think the race is indisputably closer than it should be based on the demographics of Mississippi. But I think it's not that hard for a Democrat in Mississippi to get 40% of the vote. That's what Mike Espy got in November in the first round of the jungle primary. It's very, very challenging for them to get 50. That's a hill they haven't climbed in a long, long time. And what I'm keeping an eye on, Dana, is the 16% of Republicans who voted for the third place candidate in that jungle primary. If even a fraction of them come home, then this thing will go in the Republicans' favor. But I think it's fair to say it's closer than it should be right now.
It reminds me of, I read this morning somebody saying that for Democrats to win in some of these red states, that the difference between getting from 48% to 50% is like climbing Mount Everest. So I'll have you back to talk about that. Both of you enjoy your time here on the show, as always. Ty Matsdorf and Colin Reed, thank you. We are waiting for NASA's InSight lander to touch down on Mars. The historic event expected around 2:54 p.m. Eastern Time today. The InSight will be the first NASA spacecraft to reach Mars in 6 years after an epic journey of more than 300 million miles. So we'll bring that to you live. A powerful storm hitting the Midwest ahead. Adam Klotz will tell us what we can expect in the forecast. High tension between Russia and Ukraine as Moscow seizes 3 Ukrainian ships and sailors off the Crimean Peninsula. How the international community is reacting.
Sunday's outrageous violation of sovereign Ukrainian territory is part of a pattern.
Crimean Peninsula, tensions running high between the two countries since the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014, with both the European Union and NATO calling for restraint from both sides. Trey Yingst is following this from our Jerusalem bureau. Will they get such restraint, Trey?
Well, Dana, the UN Security Council held an emergency meeting today to discuss the latest escalation between Russia and Ukraine. At that meeting, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, called on Russia to immediately release the crews and ship members that are currently being held after they were captured during yesterday's incident. Haley adding that Russia must abide by its international obligations and that from the perspective of the Trump administration, the country's actions on Sunday were a violation of international law. Haley's comments come after a Russian ship rammed a Ukrainian tugboat near the Kerch Strait yesterday. Following the incident, the Ukrainian and Russian boats exchanged fire, leaving at least 6 Ukrainian sailors injured. Now, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko is calling for the introduction of martial law in Ukraine that would increase the country's defense capabilities and allow for postponed elections. The Ukrainian parliament is set to vote on this proposal this afternoon. This as Poroshenko spoke directly to Russian leadership demanding the release of the 23 sailors, and the Russians are blaming the Ukrainians for the whole ordeal. Now, Dana, as world leaders weighed in on this situation, President Trump has not yet spoken out about the clash between Russia and Ukraine, but the White House does tell Fox News that the president has been briefed on the situation. Dana?
I'm sure he has. All right, Trey, thank you. For more on this, I'm joined by Daniel Fried, Atlantic Council Distinguished Fellow and a former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, a good friend of this show. I want to play for you some sound from Nikki Haley at that UN Security Council meeting and have you react. Listen here.
This is no way for a law-abiding, civilized nation to act. Impeding Ukraine's lawful transit through the Kerch Strait is a violation under international law. It is an arrogant act that the international community must condemn and will never accept.
Ambassador Fried, your thoughts?
Good statement, and good for her for making it.
Okay, would you care to expand? I wanted to ask you about the arrogance comment, because isn't it unusual that the Russians would find a time to do this right before a big international meeting, or is that something you've come to expect?
I think the Russians are testing us. I think that they want to see whether the West in general and the United States in particular will respond to their trying to take another slice of Ukraine, in this case by limiting Ukraine's access to the Sea of Azov. I think that we need to be prepared to push back against the Russians. I think we need to prepare options so that Nikki Haley's strong and good words are backed up by the possibility of action, and I think we should be working with the Europeans to present a united front to Putin.
General Jack Keane was on air earlier today talking about the importance of this port. Take a listen here.
About 25–40% of their economy comes out of those ports, and they enter the Black Sea from there and then into the European and global economy. This is the first time they engaged Ukrainian naval ships in the Kerch Strait, and that's part of the issue here. It's an economic squeeze on Ukraine as much as the military pressure they're putting on them in eastern Ukraine.
So it is a strategic attack.
He's right. General Keane is right. The Russians have been blocked on land because of Ukrainian resistance and Western resolve shown through our sanctions policy. So the Russians are looking for a soft spot, and so they've gone sort of around the corner and hit the Ukrainians by sea. They're now waiting to see how the U.S. responds. President Trump should be meeting with President Putin on the margins of the G20 the end of this week in Argentina. And this is a good opportunity for the president to, well, get rid of that bad taste from the Helsinki press conference in the summer and stand up to Putin. It's a good opportunity for the president.
The Ukrainian president, Poroshenko, so he is up for re-election next March. Apparently he is quite far behind. I saw some people suggesting on the Twitters, I'm not saying that these are not Ambassador Fried necessarily, but saying that Poroshenko has put himself into a position where the Russians might try to claim that he's just trying to wag the dog here and cause a problem to help bolster his political ambitions. What do you think of that?
Oh, the Russians would say that. Every time they engage in some aggression against Ukraine or anybody, they always have another story to explain how it's really the other guy's fault that the Russians hit him. Nonsense, and probably Russian bots and trolls are spreading that nonsense all through the West. We shouldn't pay attention to that. At the same time, it's critical that the Ukraine's presidential elections go through on schedule, as scheduled, and whether Poroshenko is reelected or not is something for Ukrainians to decide.
Yeah, right. And do you think that sanctions are warranted here? When you talk about action from President Trump, do you think that is military action, or is it, where would you place it?
Not military action by ourselves. I think helping the Ukrainians militarily is something the Trump administration has done. Providing weapons should do more of, good for them. And I also think we should be preparing additional sanctions. We have sanctions options.
Right.
Now, prepare doesn't mean pull the trigger, but prepare and let the Russians know we're preparing. Let them know that we're prepared to make them hurt. They need to back off, give the sailors back, give the Ukrainians access to the Sea of Azov, and therefore we can show that a Russian act of tactical aggression ends up with a strategic defeat for Putin.
All right. Ambassador Daniel Fried, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Grocers clearing romaine lettuce off their shelves after an outbreak of E. coli. So when will it be safe to eat Caesar salad again? Everyone's asking. We'll get an update from the FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, next. Plus, the Senate runoff race in Mississippi, voters casting ballots tomorrow. So who has the edge? New poll numbers straight ahead.
And it's so important that we send a conservative in Cindy Hyde-Smith to Washington to support President Trump in case he does have another opportunity to confirm a conservative to the Supreme Court.
Your brain changes as you get older.
Growing evidence that romaine lettuce linked to a recent E. coli outbreak was likely grown in California. A nationwide recall kept the leafy green off holiday tables this Thanksgiving. The outbreak leaving dozens of people sick in 11 states. And joining me now is Food and Drug Administrator, FDA Administration Commissioner, Dr. Scott Gottlieb. You're not just an administrator, you are the commissioner, and it's good to have you here. So when you found out, when you got the first call that you were going to have to make this announcement that romaine was off limits for the holidays, what went through your mind?
Well, a tough thing to do right before Thanksgiving. I understand the hardship it's going to cause a lot of families. They had been preparing the meals. My own wife called me and told me that she had prepared a salad that we were now going to have to throw out. So I understand the impact this has not just on consumers but growers. But we had clear evidence that there was an outbreak and that product that was contaminated was still in the marketplace. So it was important to purge the market of that produce to try to keep
Do you think that's
safe.
Been done now?
We think it's been done now. So we're going to put out a statement a little later today saying that we think we've isolated the problem to produce grown in the coastal regions of California, of central and northern California, and that produce that's grown in other parts of the country and post a certain date, we're going to identify that date, is probably safe to put back into commerce now. So what we wanted to do was purge the market of the produce that was probably contaminated, which has now been isolated, we think, to California. And now stores can start restocking with produce that's being harvested from Florida or North Carolina or other parts of the country.
Well, that'll be a relief for people, especially for those Caesar salad lovers.
Romaine,
I'm one of them. I did want to talk to you. We've had you on a couple of times, and one of the things that President Trump touches on and the American people are thinking about is just the cost of drugs. And there was a study by GoodRx that came out that said more than 40% of Americans are struggling to pay for their cost of their medications, even though nearly all of them have some kind of health insurance coverage. And this has been on my mind about insulin, and I wanted to ask you about it because it's been in the news a lot, and get your take so that you can maybe reassure people about what the FDA is trying to do. Let's take a listen to this radio interview from last week.
She used her sister's, she used her grandpa's insulin until they could no longer, allow her to borrow their insulin. I didn't know she was rationing. She did try to get help from resources. Those resources were limited, but because of her income, because of mom's income, she could not get extra help. She was kicked off of Medicaid because of her income. So at this point, how does Americans become eligible?
Diabetes is certainly one of the big diseases that it's overwhelming for a lot of people. And I know the FDA is trying to focus on this, and I wondered what you thought today.
Well, we've heard stories like that. I don't think this is isolated. I think there's a lot of people who struggle to pay for a lot of drugs, including insulin. And insulin's obviously a drug that you're dependent upon. If you have diabetes, you need to use it chronically. We're going to be changing the way we regulate insulin, insulin's currently, they're biologics, but they're regulated as drugs. We're going to be moving them over to our biologics program at FDA. And as we do that, we're going to open them up to biosimilar competition, so competition from generics. And we're going to be doing this in a way where the existing drugs aren't going to be conferred with any additional exclusivity. But some of the ways that companies have been accused of sort of maintaining their patents on these products and blocking generic competition, as we move them over to this new pathway, some of those what we call evergreening techniques are going to be blocked. So I think that when we do this, I'm going to do it very shortly, it's going to enable a lot of these insulin products to be opened up to more competition.
And will that solve a problem that I also read about today, this concern that there will be a shortage of insulin come the year 2030?
Yeah, that's a different challenge. I mean, that's a challenge of emerging markets where you have a lot of diabetics, a lot of new diabetes as sort of an emerging chronic problem in India and China and other countries,
right,
and limited manufacturing capacity around the world. These are not trivial products to manufacture and make, and just the cost of goods of manufacturing these can be high. So there is some manufacturing challenges with building out that capacity. Well, what this will solve is, I think it's going to make it easier to introduce generic versions of insulin so that there's going to be more low-cost competition coming into the market. It's not going to immediately solve challenges like the one identified by that patient, but over time, I think you'll see more competition and lower prices.
And then you did the e-cigarette moves that you wanted to do. Do you feel good about those?
we feel good right now. You know, that we had to titrate that carefully because we want to leave these opportunities for the e-cigarettes open to currently addicted adult smokers as opportunities to migrate off of combustible tobacco. But we've got to close off avenues where children are getting access to these products and some of the things that are making them appealing, particularly the flavors. So we tried to strike a careful compromise. If we don't see youth e-cigarette use rates go down quickly, we're going to have to come back and potentially do some more.
All right. Well, we will stay in touch with you. We love
Thanks
learning about these issues. Scott Gottlieb, thank you. Senate runoff election in Mississippi with a poll sponsored by a Republican-leaning blog showing GOP Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith holding a 10-point lead over her Democratic challenger, Mike Espy. And President Trump doing his part to help Hyde-Smith. He's holding 2 rallies tonight in Mississippi. Peter Doocy is live in Biloxi. Peter, this is the federal elections that never end of 2018 edition.
They're almost over, Dana, but remember, this is a runoff, not a recount. And so both candidates today are going around reminding Mississippi voters that whether they cast ballots 3 weeks ago or not, they have another bite at the apple tomorrow. The Democratic candidate Mike Espy is out and about glad-handing with voters today and fielding questions about recently unearthed and controversial comments made by Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, including jokes about discouraging young people from voting and public hangings.
Her comments on the public hangings, I'm just going to repeat what I said already. I mean, they were very disappointing. They were harmful and hurtful, and they were hurtful to the millions of people in Mississippi of goodwill, who just can hear what that means, and they can sense that it's a throwback to a bygone era that we're not going back to again.
Those comments have become a centerpiece of this campaign, and out-of-state corporate donors to the Hyde-Smith campaign, including Major League Baseball and Walmart, have asked for their money back. But Hyde-Smith trying to stay on message, blanketing airwaves and social media feeds with messages like this one. Make no mistake, a vote for me is a vote for Donald Trump and MAGA. It's why liberal Mike Espy and the radical DNC have targeted our campaign for defeat, and it's why we need to make sure every Mississippi conservative gets to the polls on 11/27. Hashtag Team Cindy, hashtag Cindy 2018. Hyde-Smith is going to benefit from 2 Trump rallies this evening, and that's very, very uncommon. The president used to campaign twice for himself in one day, but it is very, very rare for him to get out and do this twice in a day for somebody else. Dana.
He's leaving no voter unturned. All right. Thank you, Peter. Politico's piece on the Mississippi Senate race saying Hyde-Smith has never trailed in polling, and Democrats acknowledge she's likely to win, but they argue that her flubs have given Espy a very narrow opening if everything breaks his way. Joining me now, Fox & Friends co-host and co-author of The Happy Cookbook, a celebration of the food that makes America smile, it's Steve Doocy. Do not adjust your sets. You are not seeing double. I wanted to read to you this quote
that was before. This is after.
Yeah, okay. Well, you know what? He's got a good future. I mean, things are looking good.
You're doing okay.
Henry Barber, who you might remember as a son of Haley Barber, RNC committee man to Politico, said yesterday, I think Espy voters are probably a little more energized than Hyde-Smith, but I do think conservative voters realize this race is going to decide if we have a conservative or liberal representing us in Washington, and that is very motivating to conservative voters. We don't want to have an Alabama. Of course, that's in reference to Doug Jones, who won in Alabama. There are these companies here, just for your screen here, that have pulled support for Hyde-Smith. Major League Baseball, as Peter talked about, but Walmart, AT&T, Pfizer, et cetera. And yet it looks like Hyde-Smith has a 10-point lead going into tomorrow.
He does. She does. But the curious thing is what Peter just said. The president is making 2 appearances in one day. Clearly, if she's ahead by 10, you wouldn't think he would have to, but maybe something in their internal polling is showing something troublesome, and they just want to make sure that they are able to knock on every door.
Especially and partly
sure
it's because, in Mississippi, you think, well, the Republican's always going to win, right. And it could be just that time that you take your eye off the ball.
Sure, but this is also one of those instances where because there's been so much national attention, the national party that has done the best job reminding people, yeah, we know you voted 3 weeks ago, but that was just a kind of a preliminary thing. The real one is tomorrow.
I talked to a Democrat today who told me that Democrats will win in Texas or Georgia before they will win in Mississippi. But we are going to pay attention to this race because, as I said, if everything breaks Espy's way, that'll be what it is. Okay, I want to get to this cookbook and your wonderful family. My mom had a good time reading through today and finding out that Kathy Your wife,
Yeah.
her neighbor was the Jackson 5?
She went to high school. She was in Michael Jackson class.
It's pretty cool. Take a look at a cute little thing Fox and Friends did about the book.
It was our tradition of baking these Christmas cookies that Kathy suddenly worried about 3 years ago when out of the blue she was diagnosed with a very rare and super aggressive form of eye cancer.
The only thing I could really think of that I needed to do was to get my recipes together so that the kids would always have their happy memories and they'd be able to make the foods that they grew up with.
So I wanted to talk to you about this because when you were on the first time in the commercial break, you mentioned this about the eye doctor. And I said, well, what were her symptoms? And you said?
There were no symptoms. Kathy and I were just going in for our regular checkup, and our doctor, our local eye doctor, Dr. Patrick Clancy, looked in Kathy's eye and said, you know, there's something back there, probably just a freckle. Come back in 3 months. We're going to keep an eye on it. And then 3 months later went in and he said, you know, you need to go see a specialist, who then said, can you go to Philadelphia? And she said, sure, when? And said, right now. And as it turns out, we went to Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, and Dr. Carol Shields diagnosed her with ocular melanoma, which is super aggressive and can be deadly. But they caught it in the nick of time, and they had the radiation treatment. And while she was in the room having the radiation treatment, she was just, you know, in the middle of the night, she's thinking, you know,
I got to do something.
What if this doesn't work out? Who's going to take care of my kids? And then she thought, you know, I need to write down my recipes because I make things a little differently than anybody else, and I want my kids to have the recipes that they grew up with. And everybody has a happy food, and this is a collection of over 100 recipes from different people, a lot of stories.
It makes for
and
a
out
great
of the darkness
gift.
came something really
It
bright.
does make for a great gift this holiday season because it is about happy food. You get to read a lot about you and your family. And but also, I actually had some of the food on the 5 when you were on. It was the best Thanksgiving dinner I had all week.
Well, thank
you. And I had
very
like
much.
3.
And you, after you heard Kathy's story, you went and had your eyes checked.
Oh, I said, well, I was about to blow off my eye appointment because it was in the middle of the midterms. I was busy, and I thought, I'll just go another time. And I thought, no, I'm going. And then I've told everybody in my family to go. And now I want to tell the viewers of the Daily Briefing, you listen to Steve and Kathy's story, go to the doctor.
Right.
Even if you think you're fine, your eyesight's fine, just go. We have health care for a reason.
Absolutely. That's one of the 2 messages. The first one is get your eyes checked, even if you don't have glasses. And the other one is write down your recipes. Because particularly this holiday season, if you got some time, just write them down for your family. Wherever Kathy and I go now, people give us recipes. This past weekend in Palm Beach Gardens, here's Mama's barbecued
Well, maybe
Swiss
next
steak.
year we'll have a sequel. All right, we
Millie
got to run.
Turner.
Steve Doocy, thank you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
A 300 million mile journey is almost over with the InSight lander spacecraft set to touch down on Mars just moments from now. Why NASA calls this trip 7 minutes of terror.
Everything has to go perfectly, and Mars could always throw us a curveball, to use the baseball analogy, that may decrease our batting average.